What is up, guys? This is All the Smoke on Strength and Physique with your hosts, Adam and Chris, where we provide you with evidence-based information, community support, and recognition to all who are betting themselves with fitness.
All right. Well, welcome back to All the Smoke on Strength and Physique. We have a very special guest. We rehearsed to say her last name, so we didn't butcher it about 4 times. So, that's how we like to do it here on All the Smoke. Dr. Fundaro. I honestly, I've been following you for a little bit on Instagram, and, I've learned a lot with, the gut microbiome and things of that nature with the GI health, but definitely wanted to have you on because that's a very common question I feel like I get from a lot of my clients. Hey, I'm not responsive. Maybe it's my gut, and how can I fix my gut? So if you don't mind, for our listeners that don't know who you are, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure thing. So I am on Instagram and Facebook as VitaminPhD, otherwise known as Gabrielle. I have my bachelor's in exercise, sport, and health ed, and my PhD in human nutrition, foods, and exercise. And the specific topic area was on the role of probiotic supplementation in high-fat feeding in terms of its potential protection against metabolic dysregulation that comes with overfeeding on a super high fat diet, 60% calories from fat and the majority from saturated fat. And found my way into the science communication realm of Instagram through just a few serendipitous events that brought me from academia and teaching as a professor to coaching with Renaissance periodization, and now owning my own business as a telehealth lifestyle coach and writer for Examine.
Gotcha. So you seem like you got a holistic things of kind of thing going on. So are you currently still conducting research? I know previously before we hit the record button, you were saying something about Tennessee. If you are, what are those topics still going on that you're working on?
Yeah, so I actually am collaborating with Dr. Jeremy Townsend out at Lipscomb University. I met him at an ISSN conference a couple years ago, and he was presenting his research on probiotic supplementation in athletes. And I just started chatting with him about it, and I thought, this would be a really great way to collaborate. At the time, I was still coaching with Renaissance periodization, and they really are supportive of research endeavors, so they, can provide funding. And I spoke with him, I spoke with Nick and Mike, and we ended up collaborating. So they did provide really generous funding for him. And we designed a study that is looking at some gender-specific differences in the gut microbiomes of resistance-trained college athletes. And then we're also trying to parse out the relationships between their microbiome, their GI distress after an intense resistance training bout, and then markers of intestinal permeability and fecal short-chain fatty acids.
Gotcha. So we've said gut microbiome about maybe 20 times already, but could you do us a favor and our listeners a favor? Could you explain actually what the gut microbiome is and how it could be used as an indicator of being healthy or unhealthy?
Sure. I think we created a drinking game just now. Like every time we say gut microbiome, you gotta
Honestly,
take a shot.
Yes, listen, guys, if you're listening to this podcast and you're in for the night, go grab a beer, and every single time we say gut microbiome, you have to drink until you hear it again, okay? Let's begin.
So we can talk about, the effects of alcohol in the gut too. So the gut microbiome refers to both the microbiota, or the microorganisms that reside in your digestive tract, and all of their genetic material. So we've got who's there, the microbiota, and then what they're doing, their genes. So when we talk about gut microbiome diversity, quite often we're talking about the organisms there. We're talking about it from a taxonomic standpoint. So we're looking at the number of different species, so the richness, and then also the relative abundance or the proportions of those species. But we can also look at the functional diversity. So that's the abundance and variety of genes present. That kind of gives us a better idea of what your gut microbiome can actually do for you. And the way that we can potentially, I don't want to say look at direct cause and effect relationships, but look for maybe markers of disease and or health would be looking at things like metabolites or postbiotics. So we can sometimes draw correlations between some of the things that the microbes are producing and then an increased risk of colorectal cancer, for example. So something like P. cresol, that's been associated with increased risk of colorectal cancer. Or something like TMAO is a marker for cardiovascular disease. Now, it's not so simple because people who eat a lot of fish will also have high levels of TMAO, and fish intake is not associated with cardiovascular disease. So we have to keep in mind that when we're looking at markers of disease or health, we're actually looking at an entire ecosystem. So it's an abundance of different microbes, not just bacteria, but also fungi and archaea and viruses. And they're all affecting and influencing each other. They're competing for real estate. They're competing for nutrients. So if you have, for example, two microbes that want to occupy the same niche, they both want to live in the same place, and they both want to eat the same food, means one's going to go up and the other one's going to come down. So there's not really a way for us to control all of the variables there. So the best thing that we can do right now is take a bunch of people who have the same disease, sequence their microbiome, take a bunch of people who don't have that disease, sequence their microbiomes, and then see what are the shared versus unique characteristics, because we're going to have a lot of stuff that we have just because we're humans or just because we're omnivores or vegetarians. And then there might be some differences that are unique to the people who have a disease, but we still can't determine whether it's a cause or effect relationship with the disease, or whether those microbes are inherently harmful, because that could be just that person's best option of microbiome available in their disease state.
I mean, I would assume that after someone is either diagnosed or they find out something like this, that their diet likely changes a lot, regardless if they want it to or not. They're going to get more stress. They'll start eating less. They'll take out foods. They'll add foods because they're like, oh, now I need to get really healthy. So what is that process like in the process of disease? Like, is that able to, I guess, is the gut microbiome able to help how someone feels with a disease, or help, like, I guess I don't really even know the question to ask.
I know what question you're trying to ask. And that's kind of the question that researchers are trying to answer, right? Like, can we influence the gut microbiome in such a way that we directly affect a person's health or disease status? You know, that's kind of what people want to know when they're like, how do I improve my gut health? They're sort of assuming that maybe something's wrong with their gut health, or their gut microbiome that's leading to some problem. And then can we manipulate it in some way to help us feel better? And the answer is the things that we do that are associated with microbial diversity and resilience and like general positive characteristics are also good for human health in general. So things like eating a varied diet that's high in plant matter, getting adequate fiber, engaging in regular physical activity, having some semblance of sleep hygiene, and in general hygiene, trying not to get infected with other things like COVID or gastrointestinal disease. Those things are supportive of a diverse microbiome. So that means there's a lot of different organisms there, a lot of genetic diversity, and also a useful amount of redundancy. So even if we do lose a group of organisms to, we're taking antibiotics or we get sick or something, another group can step in with similar functions. So we maintain the overall functionality of the microbiome. And what we tend to see in individuals with diseases, especially gastrointestinal diseases, or in individuals who have obesity or are eating a standard American diet devoid of fiber or deficient in fiber, is that even if we don't see significant changes in who's there, we tend to see a reduction in the functionality. So who's there might be changed in ways that are not super helpful, but also they just don't have the same diversity of function. So there might not be the same level of resiliency. And when we do see changes in who's there, what we tend to see is either a loss of the beneficial microbes, the ones that are creating things like butyrate for us, the ones that are helping to compete, outcompete pathogens. So those levels are a little bit lower, and then we see higher than expected numbers of potential pathogens. So they're opportunistic. They're kind of waiting until they have a high enough abundance that they can overcome the host immune defense and outcompete other microbes and then cause illness. So indirectly, yes, we can influence the microbiome and support our health, but it's not a precision type of change.
Now, are all of the things you just mentioned, and I'll summarize just some ones that come back up to mind, are these things that can help improve someone's microbiome gut health, like sleeping better, getting a variety of foods, eating more fiber, keeping up on your hygiene, trying to avoid illnesses? Are these all things that can improve gut health, or is there other things that might be more beneficial, or things that might need to take priority?
I guess we should probably define what gut health means.
Yeah, that too. Like I guess there's discrepancies there that I'm not aware of either.
Yeah, because gut health can mean a lot of different things and also sort of nothing. It's not a term that's used in the literature. So when you're like reading papers on the gut microbiome, people don't say like gut health, because it's kind of can be a buzzword marketing term, and there's not one clear definition. So in my attempt to communicate the literature and make things useful for people, I kind of came up with a working definition of gut health. And my 3 Ds of gut health would be diversity, disease, and digestion. So diversity refers to, as I mentioned, the richness and proportions of microbial organisms in your gut, and then also the variability of genes, meaning the overall functional capacity. So that's diversity. And then disease. So either the absence of or management of a disease, and there are 2 different types of diseases. We have organic diseases, which actually affect the tissues, like ulcerative colitis. And then we have functional diseases wherein the tissues look normal, but the function is abnormal, like with irritable bowel syndrome. And then digestion. So we are effectively breaking down and absorbing, assimilating the nutrients that we would be able to as humans. And then the remnants, the things that we can't digest, like dietary fibers, pass through to the large intestine, and they're metabolized by the bacteria and other organisms there who produce hopefully mostly beneficial postbiotics for us, or potentially harmful things in very small amounts, and that we feel comfortable with the digestion. We're not feeling super gassy and bloated. We have a bowel movement anywhere from 3 times a day to 3 times a week. And, we are absorbing all of the nutrients that we need in whatever energy balance required for human health. So those are sort of my 3 Ds. So all of the things that you listed would, I would say confidently, support that for the most part. Now, we don't know the cause of inflammatory bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome. We can't completely prevent colorectal cancer. So still, of course, we could have the propensity towards certain diseases, but we can, to the best of our ability, try to prevent those or to manage them if they do come up.
So I just want to ask a question on something you stated. IBS is not something that has an established cause yet?
That's right. Yeah.
So this is actually very intriguing, because I was under the other impression, and obviously I don't know much about it, so I wouldn't speak on it to begin with. But what do you make it out to people that are taking advantage of, like, oh, we can cure this or fix this, when they don't actually know the issue to begin with?
I think that's, or I would also want to step in and ask a question. So what is your thoughts on just the elimination diet to address that problem?
Yeah. I think I try to maintain a charitable perspective. Shout out to Eric Helms, because he's an awesome person and a great mentor to me. And he really helps with this, that people who claim to have solutions to either real or imagined problems or that they are claiming to be able to diagnose or cure things that are incurable or have no known cause. I want to believe that they are really trying to help people and that they're probably doing their best. That being said, they may be coming from a place of misinformation or even disinformation, and maybe they are trying to capitalize on people's discomforts and reduce quality of life. So to those people, I say, I don't think that that's an ethical thing to do, and I wish you would stop. but but when it comes to evidence-based ways of managing some of the symptoms, elimination diets can be effective. Now, they're not meant to be long-term, and I think that's something that people skip over. They kind of like eliminate and eliminate and eliminate, and then they're left eating like 5 foods for the rest of their lives. Right, exactly. Or low FODMAP rather than being a systematic elimination testing and reintroduction becomes just a lifelong dietary habit, a dietary pattern. And that can be problematic because when we think about our gut microbiome as a whole ecosystem, think of it like a giant fish tank, and you've got a bunch of different fish in there, and you don't know exactly which fish likes which type of food. But you're just going to go with just one food. It's like the cheapest food. And, so you just dump that in there every day or every other day for a few weeks. You kind of notice that okay, some of your fish colonies are really thriving. And then there's kind of a reduction in other fish colonies. And then one day you come in and you see that some of your fish are killing off other fish because they're competing for food. And now you've got fish that are eating the other fish. And instead of having this beautiful, vibrant fish tank, you're left with just 2 big schools. And that's kind of what can happen to your microbiome or any ecosystem over time that's starved for nutrients. So what happens in your gut is that some of those microbes, when they don't have access to a dietary source of carbohydrate, they start to break down your protective mucus lining. So you have in the large intestine a bilayer of mucus. The innermost layer close to the center of your gut has bacteria in it. That's totally normal, and other microbes too. But the layer that sits against your intestinal cells is intended to be sterile. And it serves as a physical barrier between the lumen of your intestines, which is technically external to your body, and your circulatory system and your lymph system. You do have immune cells that hang out right under your intestinal cells and are kind of sampling things and seeing what's going on. And one theory is that we have some perturbation to the gut microbiome that leads to the thinning of the mucus layer and perhaps some intestinal permeability or space between the intestinal cells. And now you get an unusual amount of interaction between your immune cells and the contents within your gut, whether it's the bacteria or other microbes or things that you've ingested. And that's one theory behind the pathology of some diseases. We don't have a cause and effect relationship established there, but to rewind back and think about what makes sense for taking care of your intestines, of your gut microbiome, this is getting really rambly, is that we want to support that diverse ecosystem. So an elimination diet that's intended to help you feel better, but you take it out forever, or you do something like the carnivore diet, or you're eating only 5 foods, you may be doing harm long-term because you haven't taken the next step of, okay, how can I get back to normal way of life? How can I provide my gut microbiome with a variety of different nutrients? So this highlights the disparity between how we're feeling versus what's going on with our gut microbiome. So the way that we feel, if we're having uncomfortable digestion or if we're having comfortable digestion, that's really not telling us anything about the gut microbiome itself.
So I feel like that's really interesting. So you could actually ingest something and feel maybe bloated or nasty, but it has no correlation to what's actually going on within yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Those microbes are just having a normal meal. They're fermenting it like they do to produce energy, to produce ATP for themselves. And the byproducts of that would be either short chain fatty acids, And from what we can tell so far, butyrate and propionate are pretty cool to have around, or they might be producing gases. Methane, not a big deal. Hydrogen, not a big deal. Hydrogen sulfide, not great. That's more on the amino acid fermentation side of things. Gives you some smelly gas. But, that's just normal. They're functioning normally. And it's uncomfortable for us, but it's not that we have damaged our gut microbiome or our intestinal lining. Now, not to say that bloating and bowel irregularities are never an issue, never indicative of something problematic, but we've created this idea of like good and bad gut health, completely made up. We've completely fabricated this problem so we can sell solutions.
So the bloatingness from me eating dairy, I should start eating dairy and enjoying it again and just keep farting.
You know what? I think it Benjamin Franklin that said fart proudly, like better out than in. It was a sign of having a really enjoyed your meal. It was a compliment to your host.
All right. Well, this is great.
Now, so if you're lactose intolerant, that means that you don't have the digestive enzyme to break down lactose in dairy. So the bacteria instead are metabolizing that. And they can do so pretty quickly, and that leads to a lot of gas and bloating, and bowel urgency. So it can be really unpleasant, and certainly could impede nutrient absorption if you're like super lactose intolerant and you're eating a ton of it, and then you have continuous loose stool. That could be problematic.
I guess this is sort of off the wall too. There's something that I keep hearing nonstop, and I've tried looking into research on it to find any type of information. And I don't know if it's just not out there or if I'm just not looking up the right scientific terms, but does lactase pills, does that lead to cancer, or is that a bad thing?
Wow, that is not one that I've heard yet. So thank you for introducing me to that.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 people that have seen me take it before, they're like, that can lead to cancer. And I'm like, I've never heard this and I can't find anything about it. So I'm just going to keep taking them whenever I want ice cream. So
yes. Wow. So that's really, I have no idea in most cases I can get to the like the mechanism behind it. I have like a whole series on IG that's like science versus science fiction. And I'm like, when we come up with some science fiction, usually I can find the science to it and be like, this part makes sense. This is where this came from. But that's no sense is made from that. Like we would normally be able to produce lactase ourselves.
The pill is just an enzyme, correct, Chris?
Yeah. Like I think it has like some vanilla flavoring to it too, but I think vanilla is.
You need to change your environment, Chris. You need to improve your diversity.
I got a dog. I thought that would help, but the dog won't talk science with me. So I've had you as a friend, and that hasn't done me any good.
Well, I can damn near tell you I would never have told you that.
All right, cool. Another thing. Go ahead, Adam.
All right. With, like bloating, I think one thing that I will, check up on clients or even myself is the amount of fiber that we're intaking. Is there a certain amount or a certain range that is too much or not enough? And if you could you explain the 2 different types of fiber for our listeners, please?
Sure. Yeah. And you know what, I think especially when we're talking about like fitness and physique and whatnot, and people are like, on a cut or, losing weight or whatever you want to call it. And they're trying desperately to like not feel uncomfortably hungry, that they're going to be eating a larger volume of vegetables, and they're trying to find volume foods. Or people are making the switch to, what is a more nutrient dense dietary pattern. It's sort of like, I'm, doing whole grains and eating more fruits and veggies and like avocado toast every day. And then they feel awful. They're like, is there an alien growing inside of my body? Like what's going to come bursting through my chest? Like, this is not okay. And they think that something's wrong, like something's wrong with their gut health. And then they get all these messages about like, oh, you need to do a gut reset. That's why you're not losing weight. It's because of your gut health, whatever, you got candida overgrowth. And what's actually going on is just that they have increased the amount of fermentable fibers. That's where the term FODMAP comes from, fermentable oligo, di, and monosaccharides and polyols. Now, those are not all technically fibers, they're all carbohydrates, but some of them are just regular sugars. So like fructose is included, so a monosaccharide, lactose is a disaccharide. And then we have these other larger polymers. And it's just that they're osmotically active, meaning that they attract water, they pull water into the gut, and that can lead to loose stools, and then they're readily fermentable. And so when we're talking about the types of fibers, we're talking about things that are soluble and fermentable and more viscous or gel forming. So they help with kind of giving us like comfortable bowel movements, and they're considered prebiotics. They're considered energy sources for the microbes. And then we have our insoluble fibers, which are mostly non-viscous, mostly they're bulk forming, and mostly they're not as fermentable. So that's something like fruit and vegetable skins would be examples of the insoluble, not so fermentable types of dietary fibers. And then something like, oatmeal. You put it in water, it gets nice and soft. So there's some more soluble fiber that's in oatmeal. And what we want really is a blend of both of those. And the recommendations in the US range from 25 grams a day in females to 38 grams a day for males. There isn't an agreed upon threshold for, just like humans, like we don't have a kind of like an upper limit for fiber. I've seen ranges of about 70 grams a day, beyond that, people start to experience some GI distress. But I've had people message me on Instagram and, they're vegan and they're like, I eat 100 grams of fiber per day. And, some tribal communities that have been studied, they're eating 100 to 125 grams of fiber per day. Now, one thing that those microbes can do is called energy harvesting. So they can actually convert those indigestible fibers to short chain fatty acids, and we can then absorb the short chain fatty acids. And whether you're, or like the extent to which your microbiome does that is probably variable and varies from person to person as well. So there have been a couple of studies that have actually quantified, fecal short chain fatty acid content, or use like doubly labeled water to kind of get a sense of, what are you expending and ingesting. And I've seen upwards of, 200 calories a day that were harvested by the microbes in males. So they might have been counting, I'm eating 2,000 calories a day, and yet their bodies are then, their microbiomes are extracting an extra 200 calories. So that's where that loading is coming from.
So for the general recommendation of 25 to 35, I know within the nutrition side of things, like, okay, 2,000 calorie diet is recommended, but like there's a very large scale based on like people's habits. So how do you determine, I guess two questions, does that depend on how much you eat in a day? And if so, then how do you eat X amount of fiber for 1,000 calories, which I guess is like a generic number that people are like, you should have 7 grams per 1,000 or 15 or 12 or whatever they go by.
Yeah, that's the other recommendation. It's 15 grams per 1,000 calories a day. So people on the upper end of caloric intake, like really huge bodybuilders and athletes that might be consuming 4,000 calories a day, then they may be approaching, their own personal tolerable upper limit of fiber intake. And it's not really just about total fiber intake, but it's also about kind of the ratio of fermentable versus infermentable or non-fermentable fibers that you're taking in. So if a person was eating, 60 grams of fiber while they're doing, say, like a low FODMAP intervention, they might not experience very much gas or bloating from that. But the flip side of that is that they're not providing as many of those fermentable carbohydrates to their microbes. And we see reproducibly that, going on a low FODMAP diet leads to a reduction in some of these butyrate producing microbes that are just super finicky and like they demand or they leave that they get, carbohydrates. Whereas a person could potentially be eating, 20 grams a day, which isn't even, close to the recommended intake. And it's all FODMAP type stuff. And so they're, really feeling incredibly gassy and bloated. When you look at the lowest tolerable amounts of something like garlic, it's like 3 grams. It's not a lot of garlic and it's not a lot of onion that could potentially make a person feel very gassy and bloated. So it is the combination of adequate fiber intake and then also finding the fiber sources that are comfortable for you and accessible to your microbes. And so that's going to be kind of an art of application for each person.
Gotcha. So how would you, I guess, recommend an individual kind of diversify their types of fiber, or if somebody is at that lower threshold, how readily would you increase them? Would it be 5, 10 grams, or just kind of, hey, here's another food environment or selection that you should try to select from, and kind of trial and error type of deal? Or what would you say with that?
Yeah, it really depends on the person. If I'm working with a client who's tracking and they are comfortable counting things, then we might aim for an increase of about 3 grams per week up until they've reached the recommended intake, kind of adjusting as needed, based on how they're tolerating things. When I'm helping folks learn about the low FODMAP intervention and they're, in sort of the reintroduction phase, then they might start with foods that they seem to tolerate well during testing. So biasing more toward the foods that they know that they can tolerate, and then expanding slowly out, maybe one food at a time with others. And then with other folks, it might be more about serving sizes. So if they're only eating vegetables at one meal, can we, add vegetables to another meal, like going by just kind of like hand size portion estimates. And really, the crux here is what's going to be sustainable for a person and what do they enjoy. I hate Brussels sprouts. Like, there's no way that people could pay me to get any of my fiber from Brussels sprouts.
You've never had my Brussels sprouts, so
oh my! Everyone says that there's Brussels sprouts with bacon, and I'm like,
I make some. Shout out to my girlfriend. We make some bomb ass honey sriracha Brussels sprouts.
I'll take your word for it.
She goes, I'll take your. I'm not gonna try. I'll just believe that they taste great.
Yeah. Give me that charitable perspective.
I would hate to ruin the moment.
Seriously. So helping people, find what's comfortable, find what's enjoyable. Just make sure that they're educated so that they understand like what foods might cause gas and bloating and why, so that they can go out and make educated choices, so that when someone says, I can diagnose and cure your dysbiosis, I can cure your IBS, that they can maybe like look in another direction, or at least, like yellow flag that, because that's just not scientifically found.
Gotcha. I love the last part of like making it sustainable and enjoyable for the client, because I feel like that's a missing art to a lot of coaches' philosophies. And I guess, the other end of the spectrum, I've had clients that have come to me, or we're at a certain caloric threshold within a reverse or a bulking phase where, hey, we're pushing 5,000-6,000 calories. And it's like, what my recommendation literally is like, hey man, you're going to just have to start eating like a kid, like get away from those nutritional dense foods and have some goldfish, some cereal, all of those foods that are, easily digestible. But if somebody comes to you eating 90 to 100 and they're starting to feel bloated, would you aggressively cut it down, or would you kind of monitor it slowly with that intake?
I think when you're reducing, you don't have to be quite as conservative as when you're increasing fiber intake, because if someone is already eating 90 grams a day and they're really uncomfortable, to me, the priority is, they've come to me to feel comfortable. And so the priority there, is comfort. And they're not going to be in danger if we go from 90 grams down to 70 grams. If they feel constipated, which I would kind of doubt, but constipation can occur from having an excess amount of fiber and inadequate hydration. So, that coupled with the fact that thinking about things like nutrient timing, there's really no sense in having someone take in a really high fiber meal right before they're going to train. So can that have like a what, I'm like, when if it's a person who's about to go, do a marathon or something, I'm like, white bread, pretzels, toaster waffles. So things that are like, that's what we want, like the really refined grains, I think it's really does everyone a disservice if we stigmatize like white flour and sugar and gummy candies. No, those things are super useful. You want to talk about like super bioavailable, like, it hits your bloodstream right away, tastes great, easy on your stomach. They're the bomb.
I think that's another missing piece. I feel like, right? It's all context dependent, right? If we need this or we have to hit this threshold, it's okay to have these foods that are sometimes labeled inappropriate or bad. But let's go, I guess, and touch with the psychological aspect of things. I know we kind of spoke about it a little bit before the podcast, but what is there, or how much does this gut microbiome impact the psychological well-being of individuals, whatever their training goal may be?
That's a question that we really have yet to answer, especially with quality study design. So we've got really interesting data from rodent studies, because in rodents, we can raise them germ-free. That means without any microbiome at all. So they're born into a sterile environment and they live that way. And we see that they really fail to thrive. So they are resistant to weight gain. They have cognitive abnormalities, immune dysfunction. They just don't develop into normal adult rodents. That's really interesting. We can also do a vagectomy. So we actually sever the vagus nerve. So that's the nerve that puts out about 75% of our parasympathetic nervous system tone. It's kind of the main highway between the gut and the brain. So we sever that, and we see that there are differences in the effectiveness of probiotic supplementation. So that gives some indication that, okay, there's a connection there. And the other thing that we've done with rodents is fecal transplants. So we take a germ-free mouse and we transplant the bacteria, the microbiome from another mouse, and that mouse then takes on some of the behavioral characteristics or the physical characteristics of its donor. So we can approach a causal relationship. The issue is that humans are not large rodents. The rodent microbiome, even when we use a humanized microbiome, even if we take a human sample and transplant that into a rodent, it becomes a rodent flavored human microbiome. So it is not really, replicating the human microbiome or the human experience, because I would argue that rodents don't really have moods. I mean, like humans do. So we are much more complex systems. So we can gather from that there is a relationship and that there's bidirectional communication between the gut and the brain, directly through the vagus nerve and neurotransmitters, and also via the periphery. So there are neurotransmitters, there are postbiotics that are like precursors to neurotransmitters that can bind to receptors in the brain, not including serotonin. So that's the one that people kind of like, 90% of your serotonin is produced in your gut and your gut makes you happy. And, that's gut-derived serotonin, and it is a discrete pool that is produced via a different enzymatic pathway and acts in the periphery, and the serotonin in your brain is produced in your brain and stays in your brain. So peripheral doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So there's far more that we don't know. And that's not what you see on Instagram. People are like, "This is you're unhappy because you need a gut reset."
And I think again, it's good to hear clarification, because people will cherry pick literature just to kind of support whatever they need to back and sell. And I guess that goes into this last final question. What are your thoughts on green supplements? Because another thing that I've been told and heard, hey, you lack, your micronutrients, try this green supplement and your gut health will be cured. Or I've heard the opposite end of the spectrum of probiotics actually will kill the live killing or the live living bacteria in your gut. And that isn't what you want. So what are your thoughts on both of those supplements?
And the thoughts aspect of it is, if these are not beneficial, what is something people could do to benefit themselves in an easier way? So like, I'll give you an example that I can relate to. For exercising, if you're not doing all the correct movements, like your push, pull, your vertical and horizontal movements, you can miss out on a lot. So just simply doing a well-rounded program is going to help your overall body and health. Is there are these greens and probiotics something that would help like that? Or what do you think is important for people to know?
Well, shameless plug. I have an article on probiotics that I wrote for Precision Nutrition. So if you Google like Fundaro probiotics precision nutrition, you'll probably find that. So probiotics do actually have applications, most commonly with diarrhea associated with antibiotics or traveling, and then also with inflammatory bowel disease. So they tend to reduce the severity of some of the symptoms associated with those things, but they are disease and strain specific and also even population specific. So there's not like a kitchen sink probiotic that everyone should take. And to your point about them killing the native microbes, well, probiotic strains are actually the same that we would find in the gut. So on one hand, yes, they could potentially outcompete others, but just like your own intestinal, your own native microbes are competing with each other, and they do directly kill each other if they need to. But what's most likely occurring is that if they're coming in, they might be setting up shop for a temporary amount of time. They might be passing through and interacting with your native microbes and then just immediately exiting. They might pass through and do absolutely nothing. There have been some instances in which they've been associated with SIBO, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or the delay of establishing your like pre-antibiotic microbiome. So take antibiotics and then you take a really potent probiotic that might do more harm than good in terms of delaying, the establishment of your previous ecosystem. And probiotics can also potentially be dangerous for people who have large ulcers in their intestinal tract. So if they have ulcerative colitis, then they're at greater risk of bacterial or fungal translocation into circulation. That's really problematic. So it's not a panacea. And if you're a healthy individual, it's probably not going to do anything at all. So it's just going to be painful to your wallet. In terms of greens powders, so I actually have a graphic on greens powders also. There's not a lot of information out there. I really scoured because I wrote a section on this for our science book, which is hopefully coming out later this year. They are usually blends of powdered fruits, vegetables, herbs, and grasses, along with some digestive enzymes and maybe some probiotics. Generally, you have some sort of like proprietary superfood blend. And while they show in some cases, okay bioavailability when we're looking at just like the powdered fruit and vegetable capsules, they don't tend to actually increase total antioxidant capacity. So like our antioxidant systems aren't changed in a meaningful way. And maybe it's something akin to a multivitamin. So we might be getting a little bit of added, micronutrient intake, vitamins, C and A and, whatever things they might be adding. And then if you have a whole just blend of digestive enzymes, if they're not enteric coated, they're probably not going to do much of anything. Even if it is one of the few that are effective, like lactase or alpha-galactosidase. They're enzymes, they're proteins. They hit your incredibly acidic stomach acid and then they're unfolded. So, they're not going to be active. They're not going to be in their active forms. So you're just kind of taking, maybe $30 that you've spent on this green supplement for mostly things that aren't going to do anything for you, except maybe be like a multivitamin. And I'm pretty sure you get that for maybe $10. So even when people are like, this is a way to get fruits and vegetables while you're on the road. I mean, there could certainly be times when you don't have access to fruits and vegetables, but I have a hard time believing that like $30 couldn't get you something, because I flew around the world for most of 2019 and like $30 will buy you at least 1.5 bananas at an airport.
Hey, and that's all the smoke. That's what I love. That's what I'm loving about this is all the smoke. Hey, stop wasting your damn money. And if you're going to put your money that, might as well just go to the damn grocery store and get some fruits and vegetables and actually eat them. And don't even juice them, right? Just eat the damn fruit and vegetable. They taste pretty good, other than Brussels sprouts, apparently.
Yeah. And those are like, yeah, and fruits and vegetables, like some of them are like prepackaged. Bananas, oranges, you know, like they come in their own thing that's like pretty stable in your bag, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, that just, in my opinion, that just shows you how like black and white the fitness industry can be. It's either one extreme or the totally other extreme. And we definitely have to have it content dependent and, more importantly, enjoyable, sustainable, maintainable for our current goals. So, Dr. Fundaro, this was great. For our listeners that don't know where to find you, could you let them know where they can find your articles, Instagram, YouTube, whatever you are on the networks?
Yes. So I don't have my own podcast, but I have many podcasts listed for I've been a guest on many. I can't make sentences today. So VitaminPhD would be the place to go for all of the podcasts that I've been on and other educational resources, or if people want to get in touch for consulting, coaching, speaking opportunities. And then BTG Comprehensive Coaching is the website that I run with Shannon Beer on all things coaching, and Vitamin PhD on Instagram and Facebook. And that's really all I have. I still have to get like a Twitter or TikTok or something. I'm way behind.
No, I'm resistant on the TikTok, and I feel like now I'm that old man because I remember Vine, and Vine was so good, but TikTok, I'm just like I can't do it because, one, I coach middle and high school basketball players, and that's all they're on. I'm like, no, I don't want to see you guys doing all your nonsense.
Oh yeah, true. That's like, you know, if you're like on Tinder or something, and then like your students see you, it's just like,
It's just a mess. And now I feel old as hell, but shoot, it's kind of crazy. But Dr. Fundaro, we appreciate your time. That was all the smoke on Strength and Physique. We'll definitely have to hopefully have you back on when, you know, more research is kind of coming out. And as more questions come our way with gut health and the gut microbiome. So take another drink. If you have any questions for her, you know where to reach out to her. And Dr. Fundaro, we thank you so much for your time again.
you're very welcome. And thank you for having me.
Perfect.